I want to welcome you to the Pro Mindset Podcast. The Pro Mindset Podcast is all about diving into the headspace that results in championship performance. High-performing athletes, winners, have this mental flow and have a positive headspace for their performances and success. Join me, Craig Domann, sports attorney and NFL agent, on this podcast. I will interview pro athletes, college athletes, football coaches, and sports personalities. Together, we can discover how you can get in the flow and have your own pro mindset. So today on Pro Mindset Podcast, I have a very special guest, Coach Mike Riley. Coach, welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much, Craig. Good to be on with you.
Okay, so I got to give everybody a background on Coach Riley. He's been a head football coach for over 27 seasons at multiple different places. He's probably known best for coaching at Oregon State a couple times. But you've been an NFL head coach, a CFL head coach, an AAF head coach, a Big Ten head coach, a Pac-12 head coach. So I don't think there's too many people on the planet that have as much experience, the breadth and width of what you've seen. So today we're going to have a fun time. And, Coach, I just want to get started by saying, okay, you played college football.
Yes.
What was your A game? What was the thing that you did to show your coaches that you had what it took?
Well, I think probably when you go back that far, and actually when you get to my college experience, it wasn't storybook at all. But I did play at a storybook place, and I always wanted to since I was a kid. I grew up in the West. My dad coached, and we lived in Idaho and Oregon, but I always wanted to go to Alabama. My dad was originally from Alabama. My uncle was the head basketball coach at Alabama. I was a Joe Namath fan, and I was a left-handed quarterback, and I was going to go to Alabama and be the next Kenny Stabler. That's what I was going to do. And it didn't quite work out like that. There were 7 freshman quarterbacks. 4 of us were moved to the defensive backfield in 1 week, and so I played defensive back. Didn't play a lot at Alabama, but what I always brought, I think, was I just loved the game. I just grew up in the game. I loved it, and I really appreciated Coach Bryant because he made everybody feel great about being in the program. And for everybody else, they have all their stories about Coach Bryant, but mine was just being treated fairly, even though I wasn't a great player. And I think that probably influenced me in my career coaching more than just about anything, except my dad's coaching background. But anyway, so I didn't have the great A game that I brought, but I did bring great enthusiasm, and I worked, and I was really proud to be in a program like Alabama's.
Well, no doubt about it. So you played for Bear Bryant, who's probably one until Nick Saban started winning all these championships in Alabama.
Yeah.
Bear Bryant was the guy. What was the one thing that you learned from him that you took with you to everywhere you went that made the biggest impact on your, let's say, connection with your players?
Well, it's like I said, I wasn't a great player, but I felt like a great part of the program. Coach Bryant made everybody feel that way, and everybody was excited to be a part of the program. And when I got the opportunity to coach, I wanted every kid to be excited about walking into the dressing room and getting ready for practice every day, so making them feel like they were home and comfortable with all the people around them. And I think that was a major overriding influence for me, Craig, is just feeling a part of it, even though I wasn't one of those guys that were the stars on the team. I was still really, really proud of it, and I wanted everybody that I coached to feel like they were a part and to feel important. And I think that's, like I said, there's a million things you could say about the football with Coach Bryant. A tremendous coach, a tremendous man, great influence everywhere. Very innovative, as a matter of fact. I was there when Alabama switched from being a drop-back passing team with the likes of Namath and Stabler and Sloan and Scott Hunter to switching over to the wishbone and then winning 4 Southeastern Conference championships in a row and playing for the national championship every year I was there. it was an incredible deal, and he had the courage to change like that. So, I think that that also made a big impact on me, is the difference in the football and the innovation that goes on within the game.
Absolutely. So since you've been around for a while, why don't you share for our audience what you see as the biggest change in the responsibilities and roles of the head football coach, let's say at the college level, today compared to when you first got started?
It's amazing because it's one of those jobs where, when you think you've seen it all, you haven't. It's like something new is going to pop up on the radar at some point. But I think that there are probably a lot of differences. But for me, through all that time that I coached, Craig, I think that there was also some similarities and some very common traits as much as anything. I think kids have always wanted to be respected, and maybe that's a little different in how that goes today, but I think they always wanted that. And I think they always wanted to be coached. I think they always wanted to be better at what they do. They want somebody that can help them and help them be the best player they can be, help them be on a team that wins games, and then treat them right, and you can say a lot about what treat them right means, but that goes from really, I think, the kind of the core issue of these guys are people. They come from a million different backgrounds, and they want to be treated with respect and to help grow as a person.
Well, our careers kind of mirror each other because I've been in the business, in the sports business, for about 30 years. And
yeah.
I think one of the things I've seen change with head coaches is that the pressure to recruit has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
The money hasn't, gone through the roof.
Yeah.
And the profile of the head coach in every state has surpassed the governor's.
Right.
And people care and know more who the head coach is than the governor of the state. And so I feel like the coaches today have a little bit more pressure than maybe you had in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Because everything you do is under a microscope. And I think with the invention of the internet, there's so much exposure. And there's such an appetite in our country for football and sports that, like when you were at Nebraska, there was probably media guys there at every practice if you'd let them.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case early on.
No, that's exactly right. All of that, almost through year by year, was amped up. And then, as you say, the recruiting was really impacted by social media. I mean, and I was kind of at both ends of the spectrum. I was at a place at Oregon State where, you could compete for and try to get some of those so-called five-star type players. But you also had to be very prepared to kind of look under the rocks and be a good evaluator, be able to project a little bit, and find guys that really love football, that really, really were into it. And then, at Nebraska, obviously, with the high profile there, it was different, and we recruited more nationally there. But the information that was out there on players became, just way different than it once was. I mean, the access to information and then the competition for players changed too. So yes, there's a ton of pressure on recruiting. I mean, it's a lifeline to success, recruiting great players, great people, the kind of people you want in the program, the combination of all that, finding out how to do that. It is paramount to your success.
Well, Coach, let's talk about recruiting just for a moment. Back in the day, you wanted to put a wall around your borders of your state so you knew your competition was just that cross-state team.
Right.
So when you're in Oregon, you had to battle against the Ducks, but you wanted to keep the guys from Portland, the best talent you had in the state, at home. And then you had your recruiting map. Obviously, if you're on the West Coast, like Oregon State, you're going to dip down into Southern California all day long.
Right.
But you're probably not spending a lot of time in Texas and Florida and places like that.
Right.
I think today it's where your relationships are. If a coach is in Oregon State but his relationships are in Florida, he's going to recruit Florida because he can. Is that fair? And
yeah.
The geographic map used to be smaller for recruiting than it is today. Today it's nationwide.
Well, because of the access of information, Craig, it used to be back in the day when we first got started, you'd have to call the high school coach, see if he would send a videotape of the player out to you. It'd have to come through the mail, and now you can punch some buttons and get a guy on the screen just instantaneously. So the evaluation of players is like you said, nationwide. It's so different. I think that it's been really fun for me and interesting because through all those changes, we adapted to philosophically how we were going to recruit. The formula that we had at Oregon State was different than the formula at Nebraska, but those things had to be processed and nurtured and figured out because they were different. But access to players is right, but you have to remember you only have so many hours, and the man hours you put into recruiting are really important. So even though you can go across the world, it's where you got to spend your time. And I still think to this day that if I was doing it right now, I'd pay close attention to my home base and make sure I did not miss players that were in our home state, and I would recruit them like crazy. And then I'd get a formula around that about how to supplement it. So, at Oregon State, it was very interesting how it progressed with more information and more access. We always would get a foundation number of players from the state of Oregon, and that might be only 3 a year. There might be 7. There's more today than there were back then, but there might be 7 in the whole state, 6 or 7, and we might get half of them, and the Ducks might get half of them, and then out of the state of Washington, which had more players, we could get 3 or 4 a year. And then we might pluck a guy from Idaho or Utah, which were close. We even got a guy from a really good player out of Montana one year. But then Arizona was good for us, and California was almost like our base. We were going to and needed to get probably 8 to 10 guys a year out of California. So we really divided that state up and recruited it. And then we had a really interesting thing happen, an incident where I got a phone call from a friend that coached a kid in an all-star game in Texas, and he gave us some film on the kid and said he was not being recruited. He had one scholarship offer, Texas State. My friend David Bailiff was the coach at Texas State. And so this is 3 weeks before signing date. We watched the film and liked it. I sent a coach down there to meet the coach. At the end of that phone call was a kid named James Rogers. And James Rogers, and then his brother the next year, Jacques Rogers, Quiz as we all affectionately call him. James and Quiz became 2 of the most famous athletes in the history of Oregon State football. And through that, to get into Texas, we found that we could go back there, developing relationships with coaches, particularly Lydell Wilson, who's become a friend of mine that was head coach at James High School. We found a connection there. And so Texas became someplace we didn't recruit as a state, but as you mentioned earlier, we did, through relationships, go back and recruit there. And then every year I would get 2 or 3, and by the last year we had 5 committed from Texas before I left. So we found another little base that supplemented our recruiting in a great way.
Okay, so when you look at 5-star recruits, 4-star recruits, and there's, people think there's a lot of 5-star recruits. There's only like 20 a year.
Right.
So most of the time you'd never get one. But
right.
Let's just talk about a highly starred player as compared to a 2-star, 3-star kid that you might be the only Power 5 offer he has.
Yeah.
How do you, as a coach, nurture those guys? Because a higher star kid, because he had other options, has a little bit more of an entitlement attitude than the guy that's just happy to be there. How did you? What was the chemistry like? Did you treat those guys differently? Did you treat them exactly the same? What kind of development did you typically see from the 2, 3-star compared to the higher star guy over the course of his tenure in college?
Well, first of all, being at Oregon State, being at Nebraska, a little bit different. We could get into a lot more doors in Nebraska and talk to more of those kids that would be interested that were on a higher profile than we often could at Oregon State. That doesn't mean we didn't try. And if we had a good relationship, with a player that might be a 4 or 5 star guy, we would jump on it. And we ended up getting some guys like that. One of them we got pretty easily because he was the son of one of our coaches that he had scholarship offers. Isaac Samalo, he's still playing for the Eagles. He had scholarship offers all over the country, but we had inside track. And so, we had some things like that. But in general, we didn't compromise how we were going to treat players in the recruitment. I think that eventually a kid is going to say, this is going to be a good fit for me. And we tried to be as transparent as we could, as this is what we're about, and this is what we can do in our program, and this is why it would be good for you. But the one thing I liked about recruiting to Oregon State is, we tried to evaluate like crazy and work at it real hard. And when we got kids, we promised them that we would develop them. And, what I really think is we had a lot of guys that were underlooked. One year we had more guys drafted than any time in history at Oregon State. We had 7 drafted. I think we were second in the country. And not one of those kids was recruited by any other school at the time. It was called the Pac-10. It wasn't the Pac-12, but not one other kid was recruited by anybody in the conference. And there were 7 draft picks. So, they were actually 4 or 5 star players, but nobody knew it. And sometimes when you get guys like that, you love the hunger that they have to be good. And so they really become fun to coach. And so they were as much into the development as the coaches were. So, and that was kind of our MO, is that we were going to try to evaluate. You can't do without talent to be a great player, but the development of that talent will be the key for whatever star that you have next to your name.
No question. When you're out there recruiting, and this also holds true when you're in the NFL and you're doing pre-draft meetings, pre-combine meetings, you're interviewing guys at the combine, what is the ideal mental makeup for a player that's going to maximize his talent, do the right things off the field, do the right things on the field, and be a joy to coach? What are the characteristics of the mental profile of the players that you've had the best success with?
Well, I think those guys really that have a really burning desire to be great, Craig, is I'm not pretending that I would always know that, but if you have that and you see that in a player, that he really will do all the stuff that's necessary to really be great, and you've got it. And our key at Oregon State was always to, like I said, to work, to give them tools to develop. But they still had to have the underlying work ethic. James Rogers is a great example. James might be the hardest working player that I've ever coached in my life, and he was extremely talented. So the combination of those two, and the other thing that James had was just a great character. James, I never heard one word ever from anybody about him getting any kind of trouble. He was obsessed with being good. He was the guy that would go in the off season on Saturday when the weight room was closed and get the weight coach to open up the room for him. And then you get a couple guys to join him, and then, a couple months later, there's 50 guys in there with him, and they're calling themselves Saturday Soldiers. And so the whole work ethic of the place changed because of that. So if you can find those players that have just a burning desire to be great and are willing then to not do the things that get in the way of that and to do the things that will help them achieve what they want, that's the key. I don't say that I have any great ability nor knowledge of necessarily how to do that, but that's what we tried to find in any way that we could. Guys that just love to play, they love to practice, then eventually they can get the most out of themselves, and then it parlays into what kind of team that you have. And I had a strong feeling that we were beginning to develop that after a couple years at Nebraska. I could see that in the kids, and we had a lot better idea at Nebraska about how to recruit there and what to do. And so, every place is probably a little different in how you approach it, but the denominators of what kind of player we wanted, the common denominators, they didn't change.
Well, Coach, in Pro Mindset, I've identified 7 things. And of course, you know, as a coach and doing this for a long time, there's probably 50. But I've narrowed it down to 7 that if you've got these, your chances of being successful are very high. And you named 3 of them. Being motivated. You've got to be motivated. And, you know, somebody that's obsessed or has a burning desire to be great, they're motivated. The Saturday soldiers are hard workers. That's one of them as well. You have to be a hard worker. Nobody's going to hand it to you. You can't get better. You can't perform on Saturdays or Sundays if you're not a hard worker.
Right.
And the third one that you mentioned was lifestyle. You can't shoot yourself in the foot. So the 7 real quick are belief. You have to believe in yourself. Passion. You got to love your game, love your sport. Motivation, we already talked about. You have to have winning habits. You have to be a hard worker. You have to have a lifestyle that's consistent with your dream. And the last one is, and this shows up on the field on game days, you have to be a competitive performer.
That's beautiful.
Which one of those would you like to comment on that besides the 3 you've already commented on?
Well, I think passion is it absolutely, when somebody's passionate about something, they are also contagious, you know, and so it kind of feeds throughout the group. You know, a receiver that we had comes to mind at Oregon State named Sammy Strotter, who was under-recruited and was a great player, an NFL player. But I always used to say Sammy brought a joy to football every day. When he came on the field, his you know, everything about his attitude was contagious. It just kind of caught fire with everybody. He was just fun, and he had fun. And I think that passion for the game is should be in that 7 that you talked about, and is really, really important to the person and all the people around him.
Well, here's what I've seen. I agree with you, Coach, and the thing that I've seen from being in the agent business and also working with coaches and being a dad of a couple kids that play college football, everybody's got passion until they don't.
Yeah.
Everybody at some point in time loves the game until they don't.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you never walk into a living room when you're a college football coach to sit down with a mom and a dad and their son, and they go, well, we don't know if he really likes football. Everybody's passionate, right? So then what you got to do is look at what are the competing passions. Is it video games? Is it girls? Is it hanging out?
Yeah.
Is it other stuff? I think that, and you see that more in the NFL. Once a guy gets money, sometimes he's more passionate, but a lot of times he's not as passionate.
Yeah.
Because he has to go to the car dealership on his off day, so he's a little bit distracted on Wednesday because he's excited about driving his new car.
Yeah.
It's not that he doesn't love football anymore. He still loves football. He just loves fun more.
Yeah. I used to say that there are guys out there that like everything about football except the football.
That is a fact.
Yeah. That's part of it. But I really like the way you described it. And I think that, you know, finding those guys and that kind of deal is I think really important, especially when you're building, trying to grow. And that's everybody in one regard or another, because even the great programs continue to have to find ways to grow. But I mean, like I said, those people that have that passion, they're just fun to be around, and they're excited, and they pop into your office and they want to talk football, or they want to know a little bit more. And you know, I just think that rubs off on a lot of people, and that idea of being contagious is the real deal, I think. Okay, Coach, kind of switching gears on you. As a student athlete and as a alum of Alabama, there have been a lot of really good quarterbacks coming out of Alabama. And at Oregon State, you had some pretty good quarterbacks too. Yes.
Several, a handful have played in the NFL, and some are still there. What is about the quarterback position, and why is it so important to the success of a team?
Well, I think that the quarterback position it's also one of those that's kind of sometimes hard to put a finger on. I mean, the qualities of throwing football or having the abilities that whatever you may have in your offense, those are really, really important to a guy being good. I mean, those are essentials. Some of the things, that then start to separate those guys from just being talented to being great quarterbacks, I think have a lot to do with things that we just talked about. The guys like Derek Anderson that we had that played in the NFL for a long time. Matt Moore played for a long time in the NFL. Sean Mannion is still playing in the NFL. The thing that they had in common for sure, and really, I was really blessed at Oregon State. We had, besides those guys, Sean Canfield played in the NFL a little bit, but he was just a beautiful talent and then developed into the all-conference quarterback first string at his last year. And I think that it really came with that passion that we're talking about and then the consistency of work. Sean Mannion was unbelievable from the time he was a freshman. He could really throw the football, Craig. We evaluated a ton of different people, and I didn't offer a lot of quarterbacks. I would wait and learn as much as I could, and then we would rank them, and then I would offer them one at a time according to their ranking. And I would give them a couple of weeks to commit and then go on to the next one if I had to. But we did that with Sean, and when he came in the summertime of his first year, he was getting the keys from the GAs and watching film. He studied like crazy and became the all-time leading passer in the history of the Pac-12 Conference until Goff broke it a couple of years later. But that had to do with a combination of talent and just an unparalleled work ethic. And that, you have to gain the respect of the players on your team to be a good quarterback. And when they respect your talent, that's one thing. But when they respect your work and your desire to help the team, that gives you a chance to really grab the team. And to be able to perform and be consistent at that position is so important to the success of the team. When we had older quarterbacks that had developed, when we had the last years of people like Derek Anderson, Matt Moore, Lyle Moyval, Sean Canfield, Sean Mannion, I'm going to leave somebody out probably. When we had those guys in the latter part of their career, we had our best years. Their experience of playing in the games, their work ethic and their work all behind them. It was really, really interesting to see. And then when we broke in a new guy the next year, we were probably down a little bit, and it just shows you the importance of being able to play that position at a high level to win games.
Well, especially in the NFL, Coach, if you've got the guy, you have a chance to go to the Super Bowl almost every year. And Bill Belichick has shown that with having Tom Brady over the last 20 years.
Right.
Andy Reid's in an awesome situation right now with Patrick Mahomes. And the teams that don't have quarterbacks, it's almost like showing up to a gunfight with a BB gun. You just don't have a chance.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I'm always interested to see is how do these quarterbacks develop? Which teams will do whatever it takes to get one? And then once they get them, how do they develop them?
Yeah.
Because you got guys like Jared Goff and at the Rams and different guys like that have shown glimpses of excellence, but they've been inconsistent.
Yeah. I think that one of the keys and one of the reasons when I went back to Oregon State, I wanted to do everything that I could to stay for as long as I could. And I always envisioned kind of staying there throughout my career. And then when I went to Nebraska, I wanted to do the same thing because what you're saying is so important. That development within the program is so important to the development of your team. That position as you go forward. And what I was getting at is that you've got the same system being taught the same way for an extended period of time so that you have building blocks for a quarterback. Those guys I feel so sorry for, Craig. They get a new coordinator every year. They get a new head coach every other year. They get a whole new system. They have to learn all new terminology. They have to start all over again with the building blocks. I think one of the really important keys, and you You mentioned probably the best example of all, the amount of years that Coach Belichick and Tom Brady have been together. It's just been phenomenal of the growth of, the continued growth and success of that team. And that's what I love being in a program for an extended period of time, is that those guys could be given building blocks and you could see them through for the time that they were there, and that gives them the best chance to be their best.
Well, when you start looking at building blocks, continuity, development, there's no question the microscope is on the quarterback position. But it also applies to the whole team.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have guys transfer, you're going to have guys flunk out, you're going to have guys that are homesick. There's a long list of reasons why people leave, right?
Right.
Might have a conflict with the coach because the coach that recruited him took a better job for more money, so he's being coached by somebody he didn't know he was going to be coached by. But there's two programs that come to mind, and neither the coaches are there now, and that's Peterson at Boise. He did a phenomenal job at developing his guys because he's right in the backyard of the Pac-12. He's not getting the creme de la creme guys, but yet they beat Oklahoma, and they did things like that people didn't expect them to do. The other coach that he's retired now, but he turned a whole university around, and that's Bill Snyder at Kansas State. He's getting all these walk-ons.
Yeah.
And some of them didn't play till their fifth year. So every year that he had guys playing that were new, but it was their fifth year in the program.
Those are two great examples about development. And, that I always Chris Peterson is a good friend of mine, and I always admired the work that he's done everywhere. But at Boise, what they did just a phenomenal job of two things. They had to go to California, too, to recruit, just like everybody on the West Coast does. And they found guys that nobody else did. Now, we did this at Oregon State a little bit, too, but they found guys that nobody else was recruiting that were great players, that really, but then the other part that Chris put with it was just great coaching and development. I mean, so the combination of finding those guys that really do have that talent and then coaching them like crazy and seeing that. And the other thing, it goes back to what I mentioned. Both of those guys you mentioned were there for extended periods where they had a foundation of teaching that they stayed with, and that's why a guy that was maybe underdeveloped at the time, through development, through coaching, through being able to learn the system over a period of time, can become that guy that makes a difference in his fifth year of college football. And those are great stories, and that's what happens with development. I grew up in coaching with a guy at Linfield College, Craig. Linfield is, even to this day, has the most consecutive winning seasons of any team in the history of college football. I think it's 60 or something now. And for a time there, in 45 years of it, I think they had just 3 coaches. And Ad Rutschman is the guy that I worked for there, who is a teacher of fundamental football, the best teacher of fundamentals I've ever been around. And he had a system, and guys learned it in the fashion of 1, 2, 3, 4, step 1, 2, 3, 4. And Coach Rutschman, if you coach for him, made you coach and learn how to coach and learn how to teach. And I think that those things, he coached there for, I think, 27 years and won 3 national championships. But the foundation was of the teaching and continued growth and development of the player and the person. And a lot of those guys, I mean, when I went there, we'd have 150 guys out for football. I coached the defensive backs back then, and I'd have 25 guys in the line. And how am I going to – but we stayed out on the field for 3+ hours, and we coached the whole time. And it was an awesome way to grow up in our business. But it's those people that you mentioned, Coach Snyder and Coach Peterson, that developed talent, saw guys develop and grow, and were impact players as they got older in the program. And through that, they continued to teach guys, and that gave them sustained success at those places that, frankly, were hard to do.
No doubt. Well, Kansas State hadn't had a winning season like in 25 years before Coach Snyder got there, so I may be a little bit off on that, but I'm pretty close.
You are.
He turned that place around. So let's now shift gears to What's the toughest thing about being the head coach? And I want to throw one at you, okay? In 2020, I think the toughest thing about being a head coach is when you have success, you can't keep your staff. And so there's no continuity in your staff. You develop them, and they leave, and they go compete with you.
Yeah.
What do you see as one of the toughest aspects of being a head coach today?
Oh, there's no doubt about that, because as you lose people, you lose that continuity of teaching. And that relationship that's been developed between the player and the coach has to start over again. And then so does the different teaching style and maybe a little different technique. So that's always hard. It's really hard to replace people when you have a true program. You know, you can have a team, but to have a program that encompasses all the things that go in it is really, really hard. And that is one of the toughest things for the head coach, I think, to continue to sustain, is to have a program, is to have something that really lasts and means something and has an identity. And if you lose people, like you mentioned, it's hard to replace. You know, I had not too many, but 3 or 4 times in a 15-year period at Oregon State that happened to me, and it's not easy. And it's one of the toughest things to do, is to hire the right fit, the right guy. You've got to be really, really good at it. You've got to be a little bit lucky as you're trying to figure out who to hire. And it is so important, because if it doesn't work, there's a lot of anguish that goes around everywhere. So, you know, that's a big deal. And then I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier about how things have changed, one of the things that's harder and harder, I think, for head coaches is they have so many different functions now in college football. You know, all the different things have grown. I mean, you could spend all your time recruiting. You could spend all your time, you know, dealing with the press and the boosters and doing all the stuff you need to do to raise money to have a program if you're not at one of those places that has a lot of money. And sometimes it'd be easy to lose touch with the football that's going on within your program. And that's one of the things it always scared me, because I always wanted to be a football coach, and I always wanted to be involved, and I always wanted to have an impact, and I always wanted to teach kids, and I didn't want to lose that. But boy, you are pulled a million different directions, and to do a good job at it, you have to really fight to keep that alive and in the football part of your world. So when you ask that question about one of the toughest things for head coaches today, that was at the top of my list, is I didn't want to lose that ability to be able to talk about football and to teach football to our players.
Well, I think the other challenge is coaches right now are getting stretched so wide and far in their responsibilities. They're held accountable, they've got the institutional control of the entire football program. They're not in charge of all the program, but they have to, the buck stops there.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter if it's an academic issue, a scheduling issue, a behavior issue, a scheme issue, a staff issue. It doesn't matter. You could pick one of 40 things. You're responsible for it.
Yes, you are. That is a tremendous point, and there is no hiding from it. I mean, because you're going to get the question if it's not working, whether it's any of those things, you know, and with issues that are out there with behavior, character, the treatment of people in general, all those things. We have seen that time and again in sports where the head coach is, whether he likes it or not, is deemed responsible. So to have a handle on that and be able to help players as they develop as people and do that, but then also be able to handle those things that come up, a really big juggling act. I mean, you have to really spend a thoughtful amount of time being prepared for all of that.
Well, and I think the thing that didn't start out, now you have to be a TV broadcaster. You've got to be a media guy. You have to be smoother than the guys that actually show up on the nightly sports, because you get a mic in your face all the time.
Oh, yeah, that is really a great point, and boy, did I learn a lot about that. And as I went along, I had one guiding light issue all the time when I was speaking to the media. And I actually got to the point like I had mostly just great relationships with media people because I always thought I've got a job to do, they've got a job to do, and I was going to help them. And I didn't always get great press, and I didn't mind that because I understood it. But I also knew that it was kind of fun to get to know these people. And I also had an ulterior motive. I was going to use them because I wanted to spread the word of what we were trying to do in our program and what was going on. And I wanted to be able to have an answer. And I always had the guiding light that when I spoke to the media, I know the players are listening. And so I always used it also as a way to talk about our team, but build up our team and talk about what we were trying to do. So I think it's a really, really important aspect of the job. And I think you also have to know when not to talk. And if you do talk, you better be very, very thoughtful about what you're saying. You and I have seen this a lot in the last few months about different opinions that coaches have about dealing with the coronavirus, and how many conflicts have arisen from some coach thinking that this is the way that it's going to be. And I kind of shake my head because, that this is something that in your field you're not an expert at. So when you get asked all these questions, you better be really, really thoughtful about what you say, because all you could do is get yourself and your school into a lot of hot water.
No question about it. You almost have to have a PR person on staff. And I know you have a sports information department at every major university, but you really need somebody that's in your corner, that's monitoring your narrative in the media and coaching you on, hey, this is probably something you want to step out. Just no comment. And having somebody that's kind of their whole job is watching what the fan base, what the national media, what the opposition is thinking of you, and it's so opposite of what we teach kids, which is just focus on you. Don't worry about what other people think. But when you're a head coach, you got to worry about what other people think.
Yeah, because you are representing a lot, and I think that I always wanted to give just a forthright answer, and I was not afraid to say, I think that there are other people that are going to deal with that, just like if I was dealing with this coronavirus, that I was going to listen and learn and be a part of it. But there are going to be other people that know a heck of a lot more than me, and I'm going to stay in tune and in step with them as we go. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I didn't always like whenever possible, I didn't come up with a no comment answer, but I tried to have a forthright answer that was exactly what I was thinking. But you need to be very, very thoughtful, because you are representing and you are speaking to, like I said, if I used my team as a guiding light, I know they're listening. I want them to hear this. I felt good about what I was saying most of the time. Not that I didn't make mistakes, but, I was thoughtful about it, because I wanted to be able to, my ultimate goal was to do what was right for the university and the program. I wanted to be as educated as I could before I spoke. And you're right, you need to have people when there are real big issues coming up, like when we dealt with at Nebraska, when Michael Rose-Ivy was going to, kneel during the national anthem at Northwestern, when that was going to come up. We wanted to all be prepared for that, and we wanted to have good answers as to why, and I had good meetings with Michael about it. And so we went through the gamut and tried to be as prepared as we could when we had to answer to what was going on in our program in that way. So, I think that preparation, good people around you, wise people, there's nothing like being able to surround yourself with people that have true wisdom about issues and kids and what's going on in the world and, what's important. I'd love to have those discussions with staff members or administrative members. I think it's really important to get some ideas and to make sure that you're organized in those spots.
No doubt. Well, if you were 25 or 30 and you had an opportunity to be a head coach in a Power 5 program, which that's extremely young, and I wanted to make it that way so that I can emphasize my point, what would you do now that you didn't do in the past because of how things have changed? What would be the one thing you'd be like, I'm going to make sure I do this so I can maximize the program's success?
Well, I think that probably the number one thing that I would do is I would spend not only on the coaching staff. I think that it's really, really important that you have not necessarily the same, but like-minded people that are with you throughout the program. That I would meet, and I think that your operations person is more than just operations. I had one, Dan Vanderreet, for years and years, that was a confidant. And so to surround yourself with people like DVD, as we affectionately call them, throughout the program that you could trust and build the trust in. So, that I would really, if I was young and starting over, I would have in-depth meetings about the person as much as the football, Craig, so that we could have a united message to the university and to the team as to who we were. That's why I always had open doors, is I wanted people to see what we were doing within the program. I was proud of it. I wanted people to come watch practice, and I didn't want them to be embarrassed by the language on the field or how players were treated. I wanted them to see what was going on and teaching that was going on. So, but boy, I would spend a lot of time if I was a young head coach right now in picking my staff. And that goes right down, probably as important as anything, to the trainers, the equipment guys, every person kind of in touch with what is going on, what is important, what is the message, who are we, and I would want to make sure that they saw this, because I really, really want a program that people are proud of in the university, that parents are proud their kids are in, that they know they're being well taken care of and treated right. And I want that message just to permeate the entire thing. So I think that the hiring of a staff and all the people, anybody that touches football is super, super important to me. And they have to understand what this program is going to be about before they get hired. And that would be my ultimate starting point for an advice to any young coach.
Well, that's outstanding advice. And what I take out of that, Coach, is you would want to be intentional, very intentional about what your identity is, and make sure that everybody that's involved in the program has the same identity. That's a good fit. And if you've got your staffing in sync with your vision and your identity, then you will automatically find players that do the same.
I think that's really well said, and that's the goal. That is exactly it. Because we weren't always going to get all the like we talked about earlier, you're not ever going to get all the recruits that you want. But you want to get the guys that understand why they chose you. And then you're in sync not only with everybody on your staff that's part of the deal, the player becomes immediately in sync with what is going on. And the relationship that builds from there is really, really solid. The understanding of why, and please, it's got to be bigger than just the football reputation of a place or the color of the uniforms or the size of the stadium or what. It's got to be bigger than that. It's got to be a real good foundation. That's such a big choice for a young man. They've got to be able to answer the question why, and you want to be able to help them with that by making them understand what you are all about.
No doubt. Well, Coach, you are one of the greatest people in the football business, and you've got a fantastic reputation as being just one of those guys that everybody wants to work for and play for. And I thank you very much for the opportunity that you gave my son JoJo 5 years ago, and he's still finishing up his career at Nebraska. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have met you. But I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate who you are. And, Coach, if I can help you out down the road, you let me know.
You know I will, Craig, and I appreciate that. And I loved meeting your family. That's one of the great things, isn't it, about this deal? We got to meet through the recruiting of JoJo, and I've been really, really excited and proud to see his development. He was one of those guys that was exactly what you want in the program, and I knew why, and he knew why, and he has overcome a lot to become who he is today. He's been injured and fought back continually, and I just admire that in him, and he's going to be successful. So I'm proud that we got to know each other through that, and I appreciate being on with you today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Pro Mindset. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. You can follow us on our website, ProMindsetPodcast.com, or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pro Mindset Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you the next time.